Class, this session we are going to focus on elements of communication. Elements of communication. Recall that in the previous class we defined communication, and then we also went further to look at the challenges with communicating with rural people. Now, in this particular class, we're going to look at the elements of communication. Like we've done in previous classes, we expect students to have set goals. They are measurable index that will help you to know if you've been able to understand the lectures effectively. And then self-assessment is very important, because when you do your self-assessment, you'll be able to know how much of what you ought to know that you currently know. So let's move on now as we do the self-assessment index for this particular session. Your self-assessment index at the end of this class is that you should be able to understand the process of communication. You will need to be able to understand the process of communication. What does communication entail? What are the processes involved in communication? And then highlight the elements of communication, and beyond highlights, be able to discuss those elements. So anyone who would want to know, that's where you show yourself as a professional in communication. So we look at the communication process to include the following. First of all, there is the communication source. The communication source is the person who initiates the idea of communication. This person also goes further to encode the message. So the source is the encoder. You know what I mean by coding? Putting the concept, the idea, the message that is to be transferred in a format that the receiver will be able to, decode it subsequently. So the communication source starts the communication process. The communication source starts the communication process. And then what the communication source does is to encode. So the source is also the encoder. And then what the source encodes is the message, that idea, that information, that concept that we want to send to farmers, that we want to share with the society. That's what the source encodes. After encoding the message, the source is expected to transfer the message to a channel. The channel could be mass media, it could be other forms of media, it could be one-on-one contact, it could be group communication method. A whole lot of things may be involved at this point. But then the channel must be such that the receiver would be very easy to accept. It will be very easy for the receiver to analyze, to use. For instance, you cannot be sending message to farmers in Igbo via CNN. Now that would be a wrong channel. Or you go to BBC, to go and send message for farmers in Ndufalike. That would be a very wrong channel. So the communicator is the source who encodes the message and then sends through the channel. Now the channel now pushes this message to the receiver. What does the receiver do? The receiver decodes the message. He decodes the message, and from there, he is able to understand or affirm, or what we say, know the actual purpose of the message. Let's go further now as we look at the core elements of communication. The core elements of communication will include the source. A source is the initiator of the message. It may be an individual, or it could also be several individuals working together as a team. Sometimes a source may be an institution or an organization. For example, if we view the agricultural sector as a system comprising the research institutes, the extension agencies, and then the farmers. The source of an agricultural message, yeah, and innovation may be the research institute or the government. So the number one element here is the source. Another element is the message. The message is the stimulus transmitted from the source to the receiver, and also the idea that is being communicated. So when we speak, the speech is the message. When we write, the writing becomes the message. Thus, for the instance we used before about research institutes, when a research institute announces that a new variety of rice, for instance, Faro 45, Faro 44, has been developed, the content of the announcement becomes the message. I just hope this is very clear. Then we have the channel. The channel is the means by which a message gets from a source to a receiver. Channels connect the source and the receiver, enabling them to communicate. Channels are classified into different ways, and for the purpose of this study, we would classify channels into interpersonal channels or the mass media channels. Interpersonal channels are those that are involving face-to-face exchange between a source and a receiver. When an extension agent goes to the village to meet farmers on an innovation, he becomes a channel between the research institutes and the farmers. Then mass media channels, on the other hand, are all those vehicles for transmitting a message through a mass medium. They will include televisions, newspapers, radio, magazines, your social media platforms like WhatsApp, X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and the rest of them. These ones are channels. Then we look at the receiver. Who is the recipient of the source's message? In this case, within agricultural communication, the receiver is the farmer. And it's good that we emphasize that the receiver is the most important element in the communication process. But unfortunately, we've seen communication processes designed with the receiver being overlooked. Sources sometimes become so message oriented. They focus so much on the message, or sometimes they focus so much on the channels that they get so much concerned about their topic without looking at how the receiver will be able to work with their message. Occasionally, too, it's good that we emphasize that the channel must suit the receiver. Agricultural researchers tend to always publish their findings in international journals, like I mentioned, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, without caring to relate to local institutions which service farmers, who are the ultimate users of the innovation. So, as a professional, I expect that you know this and then be able to factor that in when you begin to communicate to farmers. Then let's look at the effects. The effects of communication are the changes in the receiver's behavior that results from decoding the message. The primary aim for communicating is to bring about changes in behavior, skill, and attitude. So when a farmer adopts an innovation on a continuous basis, it can be said that extension communication has been effective. So adoption is a measure of effectiveness. So we are saying clearly that the parameter for effective communication is that which produces changes in the receiver's behavior, knowledge, skill, and attitude. I'm sure we mentioned this in our last class. Those of you who were in the last class, you must have remembered this. So when we now look at the last element of communication, which is feedback. Feedback is a special kind of message. it gives the source a cue as to the effectiveness of its communication. The messages come both in verbal and non-verbal models. Basically, there are two types of feedback. There is the positive and the negative. Positive feedback confirms to the source that the intended effect was achieved. Now, on the other hand, negative feedback informs the source that the intended message was not achieved. Another important characteristics of feedback that I would want you to please pay keen attention to. Please, I want you to pay keen attention to issues relating to feedback. All of us should please don't forget this. That another important characteristic of feedback is the difference between immediate and delayed feedback. Now, immediate feedback occurs in face-to-face communication where the receiver's response is instantly transmitted to the source. The intimacy of feedback is an important characteristic of interpersonal communication. Now, we also have the delayed feedback, which occurs in communication situations where the receiver's response is not instantly transmitted back to the source. Delayed feedback, delayed feedback is one quality of mass communication. So I expect you to, on your own, be able to give us instances of cases where you have direct and then immediate feedbacks, and the cases where you have delayed feedback. For instance, if I was in the class taking this session live on, one-on-one in the classroom, and then students are making contributions, I'm expecting an immediate feedback because it's a face-to-face communication. But now that we're using an asynchronized virtual platform, the blended learning virtual platform, I don't expect immediate feedback, but rather a delayed feedback, wherein maybe at the point of next physical meeting, responses will be made, or students can comment on the channel and ask their questions. So I hope this is clear enough to help you understand the difference between immediate and delayed feedback. Thank you for your time. If you have any question, please don't forget to ask on the channel, or when we get to class, you ask your questions. We will be discussing the next topic relating to effective communication in our next session. Thank you.